Amy Rodriguez stepped off the transport ship and looked up at the most beautiful building she had ever seen. The Galactic University of Xenobiology rose into the purple sky like a crystal mountain. Towers of clear glass twisted upward, connected by bridges that seemed to float in the air. Students moved along these bridges, but they looked nothing like the students back home on Earth. Some had 4 arms and skin that shimmered like water. Others had wings that caught the light from the 3 suns overhead. A few looked like giant insects walking on their back legs. Amy watched a group of small, furry creatures bounce past her, their voices making musical sounds she could not understand. She picked up her single bag and started walking toward the main entrance. The bag felt light in her hands, even though it held everything she owned. Back on Earth, her friends had helped her pack. They had made jokes about her being the first human to attend alien school. Now, surrounded by beings from across the galaxy, the jokes did not seem so funny. The ground under her feet was not like concrete or stone. It felt soft and warm, almost alive. Small lights moved through it like fish swimming in a clear pond. Amy tried to walk carefully, but each step seemed too heavy. The lights scattered away from her feet as if they were afraid. A tall, thin creature approached her. It had 4 arms and a long neck that curved like a snake. Its skin was pale blue, and its eyes were larger than human eyes. When it spoke, its voice sounded like wind through leaves. "You must be the human student," it said. "I am Professor Zethkar. I teach the advanced biomechanics class you will attend." Amy smiled and held out her hand. "Nice to meet you, Professor. I'm Amy Rodriguez." The professor looked at her extended hand but did not take it. Instead, he stepped back slightly. "Yes, we were warned about human greeting customs. Physical contact can be dangerous with your species." Amy let her hand drop. She had read about this in her preparation materials, but it still felt strange. On Earth, shaking hands was normal and friendly. Here, it seemed to scare people. "I understand," she said. "I'll be careful." Professor Zethkar studied her with his large eyes. "You are smaller than I expected. The report said humans were large and dangerous." "I'm actually pretty average for a human girl," Amy said. "I'm 19 years old and about 5 feet 6 inches tall." The professor's head tilted to one side. 5 feet 6 inches. In our measurements, that is quite tall. Most students here are much smaller. He paused. "And you are from the Deathworld called Earth." Amy had heard this term before. Other species. Called Earth a Deathworld because it was more dangerous than most planets. The gravity was stronger, the weather was more violent, and there were many predators. What they did not understand was that humans thought of Earth as home. It was not scary to them because they had grown up there. Earth is a nice place once you get used to it. Amy said Professor Zethkar made a sound that might have been laughter, but it sounded more like fear. "Used to it. Yes, I suppose creatures like you would have to get used to such conditions too. Survive." Amy was not sure how to respond to that. She had never thought of herself as a creature. She was just a person who wanted to study xenobiology and learn about life on other worlds. "Let me show you to your dormitory," the professor said. "Classes begin tomorrow. Try not to break anything before then." They walked through corridors filled with students. Amy noticed how they all moved differently than humans. Their steps were lighter, their movements more careful. When they carried things, they held them gently, as if everything might break. A group of students was gathered around a table, working on some kind of project. Amy could see delicate instruments that looked like they were made of glass and silver. The students' hands moved slowly and precisely as they adjusted tiny parts. "What are they building?" Amy asked. "A molecular analyzer," Professor Zethkar replied. It can identify the basic building blocks of any living tissue. Very delicate work. It requires a gentle touch and years of training. Amy watched the students work. Their fingers were long and thin, perfect for handling small objects. She looked down at her own hands. They seemed big and clumsy by comparison. Her fingers were short and thick, built for gripping and holding tight. "Is that the kind of work we'll do in class?" she asked. "Eventually," the professor said. "If you can learn proper technique." Humans have a reputation for solving problems with force rather than finesse. They reached Amy's dormitory room. It was beautiful, with walls that changed color slowly from blue to green to purple. The bed looked like it was floating, held up by some kind of invisible force. Everything in. The room was smooth and curved, with no sharp edges anywhere. "This is amazing," Amy said. "Standard student housing," Professor Zethkar replied. "Try to be gentle with the furnishings. They are designed for typical student use, not Deathworld specifications." After the professor left, Amy sat on the floating bed. It was the strangest feeling, like sitting on a cloud. She put her bag down carefully and looked around the room. There was a desk that seemed to be grown rather than built, its surface smooth as glass. A chair that looked like a flower waiting to bloom. Even the walls seemed delicate, as if they were made of colored air. Amy had always considered herself a careful person. She practiced martial arts, which taught control and precision. She rock climbed, which required gentle movements and careful balance. But here, surrounded by things that seemed ready to break at any moment, she felt like a giant in a world made for dolls. She unpacked her few belongings, placing each item down as softly as she could. Her books seemed heavy and crude compared to the alien technology around her. Her clothes looked rough and thick. Even her toothbrush seemed too solid, too real for this place of floating furniture and color-changing walls. That evening, Amy went to the dining hall. The food was strange, but not unpleasant. It tasted like nothing she had ever eaten before, but it filled her stomach and gave her energy. She sat alone at a table, watching the other students eat. They used utensils that looked like tiny works of art, moving them with the precision of surgeons. Amy tried to copy their movements, but her hands felt clumsy. She accidentally pressed too hard on her fork, and it bent slightly. She quickly straightened it and looked around to see if anyone had noticed. A few students at nearby tables were staring at her with wide eyes. As she walked back to her room, Amy wondered if coming to this university had been a mistake. Everything here was so different from Earth. The people were smaller, more delicate, more careful. They lived in a world where everything was beautiful and fragile, where gentle touches were the norm and strength was seen as dangerous. But Amy had not come this far to give up on her first day. Tomorrow, classes would begin, and she would show them that humans could be more than just strong. She would prove that she could learn their ways and contribute to their knowledge. She would be the bridge between her people and theirs, the first step toward understanding between worlds. Amy's first week at the university did not go as planned. She woke up on her second day to find that she had somehow damaged her floating bed during the night. There were small cracks in the surface where she had been sleeping. The bed still worked, but the cracks worried her. She had not been moving around in her sleep, at least not more than usual. In her first advanced biomechanics class, Professor Zethkar handed out delicate instruments to each student. The tools looked like they were made from crystal and metal, so thin it was almost invisible. Amy took hers carefully, holding it like it might disappear if she breathed on it wrong. "Today we will examine cellular structures," Professor Zethkar announced. "These microscopes can show us details smaller than atoms. They cost more than most starships, so handle them with appropriate care." Amy nodded and tried to adjust the microscope settings. The controls were tiny buttons that barely responded to her touch. She pressed one gently, and nothing happened. She pressed a little harder, and suddenly the button sank deep into the device with a soft crack. A microscope screen flickered and went dark. "Miss Rodriguez," Professor Zethkar's voice cut through the silence. "What have you done?" Amy's face turned red. "I'm sorry, Professor. I was just trying to turn it on. I barely touched it." The professor approached her table. His forearms moving in what Amy was learning meant he was upset. "Barely touched it? You have destroyed equipment worth more than your entire planet's yearly budget for education." Amy wanted to argue. She knew she had been gentle, at least by human standards. But looking at the broken microscope, she realized that her idea of gentle and theirs were very different things. "I'll pay for it," she said quietly. "With what?" Professor Zethkar asked. "Your people have barely discovered space travel. You could not afford to repair a child's toy from our world." The other students were staring at Amy. Some looked frightened, as if she might break something else at any moment. Others seemed curious, like they were watching a dangerous animal in a zoo. After class, Amy stayed behind to clean up. She moved extra slowly, afraid to touch anything else. As she was leaving, she heard Professor Zethkar talking to another teacher in the hallway. "I told the administration this human integration program was a mistake," he was saying. "These Deathworld creatures have no concept of civilized behavior. They solve every problem with brute force." "Perhaps she just needs time to adjust," the other teacher replied. "Time? She destroyed a quantum microscope on her second day. What will she break tomorrow? A student? The building itself?" Amy walked quickly to her next class, trying not to listen to more of their conversation. The pattern continued for the rest of the week. In chemistry lab, Amy broke 2 test tubes and bent a metal stirring rod just by holding it normally. In biology class, she left fingerprints pressed into the surface of a metal table. During a group project, she accidentally tore a paper document. While turning the page, each incident was small, but they added up. Amy could see the other students becoming more nervous around her. They would stop talking when she approached, and they always seemed to watch her hands, as if expecting her to reach out and break something. The worst part was that Amy really was being careful. She moved slower than she ever had in her life. She held things so gently that she sometimes dropped them because she could not get a good grip. She spoke quietly and tried to take up as little space as possible, but it was not enough. By the end of her second week, Amy had broken or damaged something in every class she attended. The other students had started sitting farther away from her. Even the friendly ones seemed afraid to get too close. Dr. Peter Blake, the human liaison who had helped arrange her placement at the university, came to visit her during her third week. "How are you settling in?" he asked as they walked through the university gardens. "Not well," Amy admitted. "I keep breaking things. The other students think I'm dangerous. Professor Zethkar hates me." Dr. Blake nodded. "I've been getting reports. The faculty is concerned about your adjustment issues." "I'm trying my best," Amy said. "I'm being as careful as I can. But everything here is so fragile. It's like it's all made of soap bubbles." "You have to understand their perspective," Dr. Blake said. "Most of these species evolved on worlds with low gravity and peaceful environments. They've never had to deal with predators or natural disasters. Their entire civilization is built around gentleness and precision. And we're the monsters who came from hell," Amy said bitterly. "That's not fair, and you know it. But yes, to them, Earth is unimaginably dangerous. They can't understand how anything could survive there, let alone thrive." Amy sat down on a bench that was shaped like a giant flower. She was careful to sit slowly, but she still heard a small creak from the Zao. "Structure. Maybe I should go home," she said. "I'm not helping human-alien relations." I'm making things worse. Don't you dare give up, Dr. Blake said firmly. You're here for a reason. You're brilliant, Amy. Your grades in xenobiology are the highest in your class. Your theoretical work is already getting attention from researchers across the galaxy. But I can't pick up a pencil without breaking it, so we adapt. We learn. We find ways to bridge the gap between their world and ours. Dr. Blake sat down next to her, being just as careful as she had been. This was never going to be easy. You're the first human to attend this university. You're pioneers, breaking new ground. I feel more like I'm breaking everything else, Dr. Blake smiled. That too, but that's okay. Every pioneer breaks a few things along the way. That evening, Amy tried a different approach. Instead of going to the dining hall, she stayed in her room and ordered food through the room's computer system. She ate alone, practicing with the delicate utensils until she could use them without bending them. She also started exercising in her room. Not the kind of exercise she was used to on Earth, but slow, controlled movements. She practiced picking up objects and putting them down without leaving marks. She practiced walking with lighter steps. It was like learning to be a different person. The next day, in Professor Zethkar's class, Amy managed to complete an entire lab session without breaking anything. It was exhausting. Every movement had to be planned and controlled. Her hands cramped from holding things so lightly. But nothing broke. Professor Zethkar noticed. Better, Miss Rodriguez. Perhaps there is hope for you after all. Amy smiled. But it felt hollow. She had succeeded, but only by becoming someone she was not. Every instinct she had was wrong here. Every natural movement was too strong, too fast, too much. After class, a student named Clix approached her. Clix was one of the insectoid species, with a hard shell and multiple eyes. Amy had been particularly careful around Clix because the creature looked fragile, despite being taller than Amy. You did well today, Clix said in a voice that sounded like wind chimes. Thank you, Amy replied, surprised that anyone had spoken to her. I wanted to ask you something, Clix continued. Is it true that your planet has creatures that hunt other creatures for food? Amy blinked. You mean predators? Yes, Earth has lots of predators. Clix's multiple eyes widened. And you lived among them? How did you survive? Well, humans are pretty good at avoiding the dangerous ones. And we're omnivores ourselves, so I guess we're predators too, in a way. Clix stepped back quickly. You are a predator? Amy realized she had said the wrong thing. Not really. I mean, humans eat plants and animals, but we don't hunt people. We're civilized. But Clix was already backing away, and Amy could see other students who had overheard looking at her with new fear in their eyes. By the end of her 4th week, Amy felt more isolated than ever. She had learned to control her strength well enough to get through classes without breaking things, but the effort left her exhausted. She felt like she was wearing a costume that did not fit, pretending to be something she was not, the other. Students had stopped trying to include her in study groups. Professor Zethkar had stopped making comments about her clumsiness, but he had also stopped expecting anything from her. He treated her like a problem that had been solved by being ignored. Amy missed Earth more than she had thought possible. She missed being able to move naturally, to pick things up without thinking about it, to shake hands with people without worrying about hurting them. She missed feeling normal. Amy's 5th week at the university began with what seemed like good news. She had finally managed to complete 3 full days without breaking anything. Her control had improved to the point where she could handle even the most delicate instruments without damaging them. She was starting to feel like maybe she could make this work after all. Then came the practical examination. Professor Zethkar announced it during their Monday class. This Friday, you will demonstrate your mastery of proper specimen handling techniques. You will work in pairs to analyze skeletal stress patterns in various species. This examination counts for 30% of your final grade. Amy felt her stomach drop. Working alone was hard enough, but working with a partner meant someone else would be watching her every move. Someone else would be depending on her not to break things. Miss Rodriguez, Professor Zethkar continued, you will be partnered with Clix. Amy looked over at the insectoid student. Since their conversation about predators, Clix had avoided her completely. The creature's multiple eyes were now fixed on her with what looked like resignation. As if Clix had been given a death sentence. After class, Amy approached Clix carefully. I guess we should probably practice together before Friday. Clix's mandibles clicked nervously. Yes, I suppose we must. They met in one of the smaller laboratory rooms that evening. The space was filled with delicate equipment and samples from dozens of different species. Everything was arranged with perfect precision, each instrument in its exact place. I have studied the procedures extensively, Clix said, keeping as much distance as possible between them. Perhaps it would be best if you simply observed while I perform the actual handling. Amy felt a flash of anger. I'm not going to break everything I touch. I've been doing better. Better is a relative term, Clix replied. You still move like ... double quotes, like a human, like a creature from a Deathworld. Your people are strong beyond any reasonable need. Your planet made you into living weapons. Amy stared at Clix. We're not weapons. We're just people trying to survive on the planet we evolved on. Survive. Clix repeated the word like it was foreign. Most species do not have to fight for survival every day. Most worlds are peaceful places where beings can focus on learning and growing without worrying about being eaten or crushed or burned. Earth isn't that bad, Amy said, but even as she said it, she realized how it must sound to someone like Clix. Earth did have predators, natural disasters, extreme weather, and a dozen other things that would terrify most alien species. Spent an hour practicing the examination procedures. Amy moved as slowly and carefully as she could, but she could see Clix flinching every time she reached for something. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. On Wednesday, things got worse. Amy was eating lunch alone, as had become her habit, when she overheard a conversation at the next table. 3 students from different species were talking about the upcoming examination. I heard the human girl broke another microscope yesterday, one of them said. No, that was last week, another replied. This week she just bent a sample tray. My roommate says Professor Zethkar is keeping a list of everything she's damaged. The university's going to send her home after this semester. Amy's appetite disappeared. She quietly gathered her things and left the dining hall. That evening, Dr. Blake came to see her again. The faculty is having meetings about you, he said without any introduction. I know, Amy replied. I can tell. Professor Zethkar looks at me like I'm a bomb about to go off. Some of them want to end the human integration program. They're saying humans are too dangerous for academic environments. Amy sat down heavily on her floating bed. Maybe they're right. No, they're not. But we need to prove it. This examination on Friday is important, Amy. If you can get through it without any incidents, it will go a long way toward showing that humans can adapt. And if I can't? Dr. Blake was quiet for a moment. Then we might not get another chance for a very long time. Thursday night, Amy could not sleep. She lay on her bed staring at the ceiling, which showed a slowly changing pattern of stars from across the galaxy. She thought about her family back on Earth, about her friends who had been so excited for her. When she was accepted to the program, she thought about all the things she had wanted to learn about alien biology, all the discoveries she had hoped to make. She thought about being a bridge between humans and the rest of the galaxy. Instead, she had spent 6 weeks learning to be afraid of her own hands. Friday morning came too soon. Amy arrived at the examination room early, hoping to get familiar with the setup before Clix appeared. The room contained specimens from 12 different species, along with the instruments needed to analyze their bone structure and stress tolerance. Everything looked impossibly fragile. Clix arrived exactly on time, moving with the careful precision that Amy had come to associate with all the non-human students. Professor Zethkar was there too, along with 2 other faculty members Amy did not recognize. "You have 2 hours," Professor Zethkar announced. "Document your findings for each specimen, demonstrate proper handling techniques, and prepare a summary of comparative stress tolerances. Begin." Amy and Clix approached the first specimen, a delicate skeleton from a bird-like creature from a low-gravity world. Its bones were hollow and thin, looking like they might crumble at a touch. "I will handle the specimen," Clix whispered. "You take notes." Amy wanted to protest, but she could see the logic. If she broke something during the examination, they would both fail. They worked through the first 3 specimens this way, with Clix doing all the actual handling while Amy documented their observations. It was working, but Amy felt like she was cheating. This was supposed to be a test of her abilities, not Clix's. When they reached the 4th specimen, Amy spoke up. "I need to handle some of these myself. Otherwise, I'm not really taking the exam." Clix's eyes darted toward Professor Zethkar, who was watching them closely. "Very well, but please be extremely careful. This one is from my homeworld." The skeleton belonged to a creature similar to Clix, with a delicate exoskeleton that looked like it was made of crystallized air. Amy could see why Clix was nervous. She reached for the specimen with hands that were trembling slightly. Not from fear of the skeleton, but from the exhaustion of trying to control every tiny movement for weeks on end. Her fingers closed around the specimen's arm bone, and she began to lift it carefully toward the analysis platform. That was when Professor Zethkar chose to speak. "Fascinating," he said loudly, causing Amy to startle slightly. "Note how the human's natural instinct is to grip rather than support. Even now, you can see the excessive force being applied." Amy's concentration broke for just a moment. Her grip tightened instinctively, and there was a soft crack. The specimen's arm bone split cleanly in half. The room went completely silent. Amy stared at the broken bone in her hands, feeling something break inside her chest as well. She had been so careful, so controlled, for so long. And in one moment, it had all been for nothing. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." Professor Zethkar stepped forward, his 4 arms moving in agitation. "This is exactly what I expected. Miss Rodriguez, you have just destroyed a priceless specimen from Clix's homeworld. These remains were thousands of years old, irreplaceable artifacts of evolutionary history." Amy looked at Clix, who was staring at the broken bone with all of their multiple eyes. The insectoid student's mandibles were clicking rapidly, a sign Amy had learned meant extreme distress. "You see?" Professor Zethkar continued, his voice getting louder. "This is why the human integration program is a failure. Your species cannot exist in civilized society without causing destruction. You solve every problem with brute force, because that is all you know." Amy was still holding the broken bone, afraid to put it down and cause more damage. Her hands were shaking now, not from effort, but from emotion. "You are evolutionary mistakes," the professor went on. "Your entire species developed on a world so hostile that it turned you into living weapons. You have no concept of gentleness, no understanding of delicate work, no place in a civilized galaxy." Other students had gathered in the doorway, drawn by the professor's raised voice. Amy could see them watching, some with fear, others with what looked like satisfaction that their suspicions about humans had been confirmed. "Your planet should never have been contacted," Professor Zethkar said. Your people should have been left alone to destroy each other in the primitive violence that created you. The human integration program is not just a failure, it is a threat to galactic peace. Amy felt tears starting to form in her eyes. She had tried so hard, given up so much of herself, and it still was not enough. You will never succeed here because you fundamentally lack what true scientific work requires, the professor concluded. You lack the delicate touch that separates civilized beings from mere animals. Amy finally set the broken bone down on the examination table, placing it as gently as if it were made of dreams. She looked around the room at all the faces staring at her, seeing fear and disgust and disappointment. She had come here to build bridges between worlds. Instead, she had proven every prejudice they had about humans. Amy remained seated at the examination table, staring down at her hands. The broken bone lay in front of her, like evidence of her failure. Around her, the silence stretched on, broken only by Clix's nervous clicking and the whispered conversations of the students who had gathered to watch her humiliation. She could feel every eye in the room on her. Professor Zethkar stood a few feet away, his forearms crossed in satisfaction, waiting for her to break down completely or storm out in anger. And the reaction would prove his point about humans being primitive and emotional. But Amy did not cry. She did not shout. Instead, she spoke in a voice so quiet that everyone had to lean forward to hear her. "You're right about one thing, Professor," she said, still looking at her hands. "I have been holding back." Professor Zethkar's head tilted. "Holding back? You just destroyed a priceless artifact. How is that holding back?" Amy finally looked up, meeting his large alien eyes with her small human ones. "Every single day since I arrived here, I have calculated every movement I make. Every step, every gesture, every time I pick something up or put it down. I measure the pressure of my fingers when I hold a pencil. I count the pounds of force. When I sit in a chair." She gestured around the room at the delicate equipment and furniture. "You see all of this as normal. To me, it's like living in a house made of soap bubbles. I have spent 6 weeks learning to move like I'm underwater, to speak like I'm in a library, to exist like I'm made of glass instead of flesh and bone." Professor Zethkar stepped closer, his expression showing confusion rather than anger now. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that what you call my natural instinct to use brute force is actually me exercising more control than you could possibly imagine." Amy's voice remained calm, but there was something new in it now, a certainty that had not been there before. "On Earth, I'm actually considered gentle. I practice martial arts, which is all about controlled movement and precise application of force. I rock climb, which requires delicate balance and careful placement of hands and feet. I work with children at a summer camp, which means I have to be soft and patient." She held up her hands, turning them palm up. "These hands have held newborn kittens and helped bandage scraped knees. They've painted watercolors and played piano. They've comforted friends and hugged family members." Clix spoke up, voice uncertain. "But you broke the specimen." "Yes, I did. Because for just 1 second, I let my guard down. For 1 moment, I stopped, calculating and controlling every tiny movement." Amy looked at the broken bone again. "This is what happens when a human makes a mistake in your world. But do you know what would happen if one of you made a mistake in mine?" The room was completely silent now. "If you visited Earth and tried to pet one of our house cats, you might get scratched. If you tried to open a door, you might not be strong enough to turn the handle. If you fell down, you might not be able to get back up." Amy stood slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. "You call Earth a death world, and you're right. But it's not death for us. It's home. We evolved there. We belong there. And the things that make it dangerous to you are the things that make us strong enough to survive it. Professor Zethkar was watching her intently now. Are you threatening? U.S.? No, Amy said. I'm trying to explain something you don't seem to understand. When you touch my arm without permission, when you grab at me to make a point, my body doesn't think, oh, this is a gentle alien trying to demonstrate proper technique. My body thinks something is grabbing me, and I need to get free. I would. Never harm a student, the professor protested. I know that now, but my reflexes don't know that. My reflexes were shaped by millions of years of evolution on a world where being grabbed by something usually meant you are about to be eaten. Amy moved away from the table, but slowly, keeping her movements visible and non-threatening. 4. 6 weeks, I've been overriding those reflexes. I've been fighting my own biology to try to fit into your world, and I thought I was succeeding. She looked around at the gathered students. But I wasn't succeeding. I was just becoming smaller, quieter, more afraid. I was turning myself into something I'm not. Professor Zethkar had been listening with growing intensity. Now he stepped forward again, but this time his movement was different. More aggressive, more territorial. So you admit it, he said. You are a dangerous creature, pretending to be civilized. You are a predator in a school full of prey. Professor, one of the other faculty members warned, but Zethkar ignored him. You have spent 6 weeks proving that humans cannot be trusted in civilized society. You break our equipment, frighten our students, and destroy our irreplaceable specimens. His voice was getting louder again. You are exactly what I said you were. Evolutionary mistakes who solve everything with violence. Amy watched him approach, recognizing the signs she had been taught to watch for in her self-defense classes. He was working himself up, getting ready to do something physical to prove his point. Professor, please step back, she said quietly. I will not step back from a student in my own classroom, he snapped. You need to learn your place here. He reached out with one of his 4 arms, intending to grab her wrist and demonstrate what he called proper gentle handling to the watching students. His goal was to humiliate her further, to show everyone how a civilized being should touch things. The moment his elongated fingers wrapped around Amy's wrist, several things happened at once. Amy's body recognized the grip as a restraint. Her martial arts training, suppressed for weeks, kicked in automatically. Her hand rotated in the most basic defensive move she had ever learned. A simple twist designed to break free from someone grabbing her wrist. God, it was not a violent movement. It was not an angry movement. It was barely a movement at all. But Professor Zethkar had bones designed for a world with 1/3 of Earth's gravity. His skeleton was hollow and light, built for floating through thin air rather than supporting weight or resisting force. The sound that filled the room was like a dry branch. Snapping in winter. Professor Zethkar staggered backward, staring at his arm in shock. What would have been his forearm if he had been human was bent at an angle that arms should never bend. The break was clean, without any splintering, but it was unmistakably broken. Amy looked up from her desk, genuinely surprised. She had not even stood up. She had barely moved at all. Oh no, she said, her voice filled with concern. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to ... Are you okay? The professor continued to stare at his broken arm, unable to process what had just happened. Around the room, students and faculty were frozen in shock. I just turned my wrist, Amy said, looking around the room in confusion. That's all. I just turned my wrist. Dr. Blake, who had been watching from the back of the room, stepped forward. Everyone stay calm. Professor Zethkar, we need to get you to medical immediately. As the medical team was called and Professor Zethkar was led away, still staring at his arm in disbelief, the room slowly emptied. Students filed out in groups, whispering to each other in languages Amy could not understand. Only Amy. Dr. Blake and clicks remained. I didn't mean to hurt him, Amy said. He grabbed me, and I just ... I just did what my body knows how to do. Dr. Blake nodded slowly. I know. I saw what happened. He initiated physical contact without your permission. You defended yourself. But I broke his arm without even trying, Amy said, her voice shaking now. I didn't even stand up. I barely moved. Clicks, who had been silent through the entire incident, finally spoke. How? The insectoid student's voice was barely a whisper. How did you do that without effort? Amy looked at her hands again. I don't know. On Earth, that's just a basic move you learn in any self-defense class. It's not supposed to hurt anyone. It's just supposed to make them let go. But his arm ... Clicks started. I know, Amy said. I guess I never thought about how much stronger human bones are, or how much force we're used to dealing with. Dr. Blake was examining the examination table where Amy had been sitting. Look at this, he said. He pointed to small indentations in the metal surface where Amy's fingers had been resting during Professor Sethkar's speech. Amy stared at the finger-shaped marks pressed into solid metal. I did that? You were gripping the table, probably without even realizing it. When you were trying to stay calm during his speech, you were unconsciously holding onto the table hard enough to deform metal. Clicks moved closer to examine the marks, being careful to stay out of Amy's reach. These are just from you sitting. And listening? I guess so, Amy said. I was upset, and I was trying not to show it. I thought I was just resting my hands on the table. Amy, Dr. Blake said carefully, I think we need to have a serious conversation about exactly how strong humans actually are compared to other species. Amy looked around the examination room, seeing it with new eyes. The delicate equipment, the fragile furniture, the careful way everyone moved. For the first time, she began to understand that it was not just a matter of being more careful. The difference between humans and other species was not small. It was enormous. They really are afraid of me, aren't they? She said quietly. Yes, Dr. Blake admitted. But maybe that's not entirely a bad thing. Clicks's mandibles clicked nervously. What do you mean? I mean, maybe we've been approaching this all wrong, Dr. Blake said. We've been trying to make Amy fit in. The news of what happened in the examination room spread through the university faster than Amy had thought possible. By evening, every student and faculty member knew that the human girl had broken Professor Sethkar's arm without even standing. Amy expected to be called to the administration office and told to pack her things. Instead, she received a message asking her to attend a special faculty meeting the next morning. When she arrived at the meeting room, she found not just the university administrators, but also Professor Sethkar himself. His arm was in some kind of healing device that glowed softly blue, but he looked otherwise unharmed. Miss Rodriguez, the dean said, we need to discuss what happened yesterday. Amy nodded, prepared for the worst. Professor Sethkar has something he wants to say to you. The tall professor stood slowly, his healing arm held carefully at his side. When he spoke, his voice was different than Amy had ever heard it before. Quieter, more thoughtful. Miss Rodriguez, I owe you an apology. I grabbed you without your permission, and I did so to humiliate you in front of other students. My behavior was inappropriate and unprofessional. Amy blinked in surprise. Professor, I'm the one who broke your arm. Yes, you did. But you did so in self-defense, using what you considered minimal force. After speaking with Dr. Blake and reviewing the security recordings, I have come to understand that what happened was not an attack. It was a reflexive response to unwanted contact. The dean leaned forward. We have also been reviewing your academic performance, Miss Rodriguez. Your theoretical work has been exceptional. Your understanding of biomechanics is already contributing to new research projects across 3 departments. But I keep breaking things, Amy said, double quotes, yes, you do. Because we have been asking you to use equipment designed for beings much weaker than yourself. It would be like asking one of us to perform surgery while wearing thick gloves. Professor Zethkar spoke again. I have spent the last day learning about Earth and human evolution. Your species developed on a world that would kill most of us. Within hours, the gravity alone would crush our bones. The atmospheric pressure would rupture our organs. The predators would hunt us with ease. Amy shifted uncomfortably. Earth isn't that bad once you're used to it. That statement reveals more about humans than you realize, the dean said. You are the products of millions of years of survival on a world that represents the extreme end of habitability. And yet you have developed intelligence, culture, art, and science. Most species that evolve on challenging worlds never develop beyond basic survival, Professor Zethkar added. The fact that humans have reached space travel while maintaining both physical strength and intellectual capacity is remarkable. Amy looked around the room at the assembled faculty members. They were all watching her, but the fear she had grown used to seeing was mixed now with something else. Something that looked like respect. What does this mean for the integration program? She asked. It means we need to change our approach, the dean said. Instead of trying to make you fit into our existing systems, we need to create new systems that accommodate human capabilities. We are designing new equipment, another professor added. Stronger materials, different interfaces, tools that can handle the kind of force humans naturally apply. Professor Zethkar stepped closer to Amy, moving slowly so as not to startle her. I would like to ask you something. Would you be willing to demonstrate your actual strength for us? Under controlled conditions, of course. Amy hesitated. What do you mean? I mean, show us what human strength really looks like when it's not being restrained. An hour later, Amy found herself in the university's materials testing laboratory, surrounded by faculty members and advanced students. They had set up a series of tests using equipment designed to measure forces that could break starship hulls. Start with whatever feels comfortable to you, the lab director said. Amy approached a device that measured grip strength. She rapped her fingers around the sensor and squeezed gently. The readout showed numbers that made several faculty members step backward. That was gentle? Professor Zethkar asked. That was barely trying, Amy said. On Earth, that would be how I'd hold. A bird or a butterfly. Try squeezing harder. Amy increased her grip slowly, watching the numbers climb. When she reached what felt like normal strength to her, the device started making warning sounds. This is how I'd normally shake hands with someone, she said. Numbers on the display were now higher than the maximum force most species could generate with their entire bodies. And if you are actually trying to grip something tightly? Amy squeezed harder. The device's warning sounds became urgent, and then there was a sharp crack as the sensor broke. The room fell silent. I'm sorry, Amy said automatically. Don't apologize, the lab director said, staring at the broken equipment. That device was rated to measure forces that could crush starship armor. They moved to other tests. Amy demonstrated her normal walking pace on a treadmill designed for heavy machinery. She showed how she would naturally sit down in a chair, leaving permanent impressions in metal that was supposed to be indestructible. With each demonstration, the assembled faculty members looked more amazed and less afraid. Now I understand, Professor Zethkar said finally. You haven't been clumsy or careless. You've been exercising constant, incredible restraint. Every human would have to do this, Amy said. If more humans come to study here, they'll all have the same problems. Then we'll solve those problems, the dean said firmly. Miss Rodriguez, would you be willing to help us design a new curriculum? One that takes human capabilities into account? Amy smiled for the first time since arriving at the university. I'd like that very much." 6 months later, Amy was still at the university, but everything had changed. She now worked as both a student and a consultant, helping to design equipment and protocols for future human students. Her academic work had advanced rapidly once she could handle instruments that didn't break at her touch. Professor Zeth Carr had become one of her strongest supporters and closest colleagues. His arm had healed completely, and he often joked that having it broken by a human had been the most educational experience of his career. The university had established the first Deathworld Studies department, with Amy as its first graduate student. Applications from students across the galaxy were pouring in from beings who wanted to learn about survival on extreme worlds. Most importantly, the way other species viewed humans had begun to change. Instead of seeing them as dangerous primitives, they were starting to understand humans as incredibly capable beings who had learned to thrive in conditions that would destroy most life forms. Amy had kept her promise to herself. She had become a bridge between worlds, helping to build understanding between humans and the galactic community. It just hadn't happened the way she had expected. As she sat in her laboratory, working with instruments designed to handle human strength while maintaining alien precision, Amy reflected on how much she had learned about herself and her species. Humans weren't too strong for the galaxy. The galaxy had just needed to learn how to accommodate their strength. And that, she thought, was a lesson worth breaking a few arms to teach.